Listen, we've got a hot topic for you today. We're going to talk about a lot going on in the NBA, but let's talk about diversity in the NBA.
Iron Skillet Sports presents.
Listen, Jay, we're going to talk about diversity in the NBA and what's going on with head coaches as movement has gone around the NBA and the league. So one of the biggest things is we've got to talk about Tom Thibodeau being hired by the New York Knicks. Now, I know that's a big hire for some people, and some people who aren't really big Tom fans, maybe they don't like it, but I like Tom Thibodeau. I think you like Tom Thibodeau, and I think Tom Thibodeau has something to say about it.
Everyone has to do their job. Do your job.
So now we've got Tom Thibodeau doing his job as a New York Knick. Jay Sizzle, do you know it has been almost 80 years since the Knicks, it seems like 80 years, but seriously, it's been around 50 years since the Knicks have won a championship? Can you believe it?
Yeah, it's amazing how long one of the storied franchises in the NBA has not been able to pull it together and win a championship. It's really amazing, in the Big Apple, they just can't take a bite of something that they should be able to win. And that's a world championship. I don't know why that is.
All right, Jay, let's talk about diversity in the NBA. Let's talk about the NBA Rooney Rule. How does this work for the NBA? Is there a way to make sure there's diversity? We talked about Tom Thibodeau at the opening segment. We talked about the fact that now the Knicks have a new coach. I think that because Tom fits into what they want to do, a good coach that fits that style. I'm concerned with now what's going on as far as coaches. Are they getting an opportunity to come in and be effective? Are they being able to come in and get jobs? Those who, as I like to say all the time, melanated coaches being able to coach melanated players. So we know that Leon Rose in World Wide West tabbed Tom Thibodeau for their coaching position. But was this a fair hire? Was this all in up and everything above board with the way that Thibs was brought in to coach the Knicks?
Well, the first thing, let's answer the first part of the question. The NBA doesn't really have the Rooney Rule. And the reason why that is because they're one of the more diverse large sports in the United States. You have 80% of the players are African-American in there. And so Adam Silver has done a really good job of spreading the wealth a little bit. Now, what you're starting to see is that black coaches are not coming from the player ranks. It used to be from like 2001 to 2014, most of the black coaches that were coaching in the NBA, I want to say about 80% of them had once played in the NBA. Now that number past 2016 is only about 40%. So what you're looking at right now is that the pool to pull coaches from are not coming from that player rank. And so now you got to ask yourself a question. What pool, if they're not pulling from previous players, what pool are they pulling from? That's the question. So you look at what Tom Thibodeau, it was some of the same players, some of the same coaches being rehashed. You heard Mark Jackson going there, TYRONN LUE going through there. And he's actually being looked at for the Nets job because Kyrie Irving is really a proponent of his because of their play back in Cleveland when they went down there and they won a championship. So the thing is right now, if you look from the Knicks perspective, you really just had Mark Jackson. You had a couple other people that were available there. So the question is, who other than Mark Jackson, who other than TYRONN LUE really had a real shot at that Knicks job?
Yeah, it's a big question. And we have to ask, if they're not assistants who are moving up and making these kind of decisions, then what are we really doing? One of the job openings that we talked about privately and one that's been discussed publicly through the NBA is what the Chicago Bulls are going to do with Jim Boylen. Now, there's a lot of talk that when the new management team came in, you had a different feel. And if in the beginning there was a feel that maybe there was going to be movement, that head coach movement, but are African Americans, are melanated coaches getting these opportunities to come in and not only be managers, but be coaches in one of the leagues that I think is uh, over 90% African or melanated or of melanated people. So are these coaches getting these fair shakes when you have management and you have ownership where they're trying to pick people who don't look like them, sound like them, or think like them? Do you think that these coaches have gotten a fair shake in the hiring process in the NBA?
Well, the problem is that a lot of these coaches, black coaches, were coming into bad programs. And so when they came into bad programs, they were getting shots, especially I think around 2014 to 2016. You saw there was, I think, about 14 black coaches in the NBA right there, nearly half. But now you looked at, as time went by, these coaches weren't able to produce. You saw Fizdale with the Knicks, who actually didn't do too bad of a job, but he didn't really have the players. And all of a sudden you looked up when he started off his season, I think it was 0-4 or something like that. Pretty soon he was right out the door, and then he was going to be replaced by a non-melanated, as you like to say, coach. And that's what they're looking at. So you're looking at a situation that you get black coaches being hired into not really good situations, or if they come in like a Mark Jackson, who came into Golden State, who took them from a 20-win team to a 51-win team, and all of a sudden when they look like they're ready to make the jump to be NBA champions, or at least compete for an NBA championship, they removed him and then brought in Steve Kerr. So are they getting a shot at the head coaching positions? They were getting a shot at a much greater clip. Right now, though, these guys who have been former players, they're not getting these shots. And black coaches, when they're getting fired, for the most part, they're not being replaced by other black coaches. They're being replaced by white coaches.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about it some more when we talk about Mark Jackson and TYRONN Lue and maybe the invention of a Rooney Rule. But let's talk about the fact that out of 30 head coaches, 21 of those coaches have no NBA experience. They have not played, they were not players, or they played maybe at a lower level, but not in the NBA. Only 9 current NBA coaches have played in the NBA. Now, that doesn't sound like a great recipe for winning, but when you look at the fact that out of the 9 players that have played, you have 5 non-melanated whites, you have 4 melanated black players who have actual NBA experience. And the greatest out of all of those players at the moment is Doc Rivers, who has a resume that has done something in the NBA and after his playing career and has won. Do these players, do they even have the initiative or the drive to want to be head coaches moving forward in the NBA? Are we seeing that maybe there's a lull in the players who want to be head coaches?
Well, the problem is, it's not so much. I think it's a change in what the management's looking for. I think right now you have players, they wanted that coach who had that respect of the players. And former NBA players did have the respect of the players, of Doc Rivers, of TYRONN Lue, other players like Mark Jackson had that respect. And that's why you started to see that, because these guys' salaries started to farly extend past what the coach's salary was. You're looking at a top coach, in the NBA. I know we're looking at Tom Thibodeau, one of the lower paid coaches, only going to be making about $1.5 million a year. What is he going to say to a guy like Zach LaVine, who's making nearly $20 million a year? It's like that guy's like, you can't tell me anything. But the same problem is that we're seeing it also at the college level. You got 80% of the players at Division I basketball are black, but you only see that only about 20% or so of the of coaches in Division I NCAA basketball are black. Most of those coaches are on the assistant coach level, so they can relate to the players recruiting wise to bring those players into those big programs. So the problem again is, like, where are they bringing in these coaches to get who have head coaching experience in the college? If they haven't played in the NBA, where are they getting head coaching experience in? And that's why you're starting to see the drop, where it's only like about less than half of the coaches black coaches who are coaching in the NBA have NBA experience. And I want to say right now, I think the numbers are going to drop. I really believe the numbers are going to drop because right now it's all about the production. Especially right now, you got to start putting butts in the seat. We start to see what happened to some of these programs in the NBA. Guys, teams who are not winning, like the Knicks, you look at their gate about what they're bringing in, and that's a real problem. That's why you start seeing them going to get a Kyrie Irving. You see them going to go get a banged up Durant. And so you're starting seeing what's going to happen. Well, that's the Nets. I'm sorry. You start to see what's going to happen with these teams. But like I'm saying before, the pool of black coaches with legitimate head coaching experience is really thinned out.
Yeah, it really, when you talk about what you look at and you look at quality head coaches, I always think that maybe opportunity is where we miss the mark. How these coaches, what opportunities have they had? When you have Doc Rivers, let's take Doc Rivers, for example. Doc Rivers won a title with Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Rajon Rondo, Ray Allen, and you could go on and name people who were on that team. Big Baby, Glenn Perkins was on that team. There were a lot of moving parts on that team, and they were able to defeat a Heat team that was coached by a relatively unknown head coach in Eric Spoelstra. But when you look at where Doc Rivers stood, you don't see a lot of melanated head coaches who get an opportunity to have teams that have such great players that they can come in and compete and be NBA champions because they have a roster that's full with some all-stars or even, Hall of Famers that will go on and propel them. I don't know really where you can put in and how you place the LeBron James factor, because he's offset a lot. And, Steve Kerr has done such an amazing job with Golden State, but you don't have a lot of melanated head coaches in these positions who can have an impact with the rosters they have. Now, maybe I'm wrong. What are your thoughts? Do you think that you've gotten melanated coaches to get into these positions and they just haven't been able to close the deal?
Well, the problem is that these black coaches, melanated coaches, whatever you want to call them, what price are they coming in at? Are they demanding this top dollar that some of these other coaches get? A lot of it has to do with they'll take the head coaching job and not really press for the top salary. And so a lot of times the black coach is brought in as a stopgap until the other players on that team start to develop, and so they can go get another coach. That's what management's thinking. Go get another coach who has championship pedigree. And so that's what we're seeing that all the way across the board, is that we're starting to see these guys, black coaches, getting in on teams. Doc Rivers is the exception because he's fallen into some really good programs. Ty Lue fell into a really good program, but he had one of the top players all time playing with him and probably one of the top point guards playing with him. So that he fell into a good program. Mark Jackson built that program, but once they had him there, they felt like Mark Jackson wasn't going to be able to take a jump shot shooting NBA style team that nobody had ever seen win a championship. They didn't think he had the cachet or the knowledge of a different offense to be able to make that team win. So what you're starting to see right now is that a lot of black coaches are being put in as stopgaps on these situations. But I'm going to start to see, I really think you're going to start seeing less black coaches, because now you just have mostly the old guard who's still out here coaching. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think you're going to see less black coaches in the NBA.
All right, Jay. So we're talking about coaching and head coaching in the NBA. And what does it look like? How is it being constructed? Let's go back to your point where you said we're going to see less melanated African-American head coaches in the NBA. Is this an opportunity or a time now when we need to really discuss and think about pulling in a Rooney Rule for the NBA? And does a Rooney Rule work? Let's ask this question. Does a Rooney Rule work for the NBA or for the WNBA, but especially for the NBA? Can that Rooney Rule work?
Well, the issue is that they've already they don't really qualify for the Rooney Rule. I hate to say it, because you looked at within the last 4 or 5 years, nearly half of the coaches in the NBA were black. So the problem is, you're saying, well, it's not 80%, but you don't have to necessarily reflect that of the players in the league to the number of black head coaches. So coaches are getting the chance to be interviewed for these jobs. Mark Jackson got a chance to be interviewed for the Knicks job. TYRONN Lue got a chance to be interviewed for the Knicks job. He's looked at for getting the Nets job right now. He's actually one of the front runners for it. So the question is that these guys not getting interviewed. The problem is that you don't have enough black GMs on the top who can pull the trigger to bring these guys in. That's the biggest problem. And you definitely don't have very, very, very little black ownership on the top. And so we saw the same thing we talked about before about Major League Baseball, talking about the Ivy League guys coming in and taking over Major League Baseball, and who are bringing in people like them. Well, it's the same situation. These owners are bringing in GMs who are like them, and those GMs are going to end up hiring people like them, and they don't look like a black person applying for this coaching job. So I really think a lot of it there's not enough black ownership, there's not enough black GMs, and therefore you're going to water down how many black coaches are actually going to be hired in the NBA.
That's the bigger question right now. Is it the ownership? We did talk about it, and if you haven't checked out our segment on the MLB and the preppy movement in MLB, please make sure that you look for it. We talked about this before. When ownership, they're getting in coaches, they're getting in general managers that look like them, that reflect their ideologies and their perspectives. Is this something that the NBA can lead the way in moving towards being not only more inclusive, but looking to find more melanated people, be it men or women, who can come in and do these jobs? Is this something that has to be targeted in the coaching ranks, or is this something that has to be targeted in the general manager rank?
Well, the problem is if it's not targeted in the NCAA, you got to think about it. You only had 3 or 4 black coaches who actually won a championship in the NCAA. You got out of Georgetown, it was Thompson. You look at UConn recently. Their coach just won a national championship.
Yeah,
but
Kevin Ollie did.
Yeah,
and then he was fired, wasn't he?
Yeah. And so you're looking at a situation where these guys are not getting an opportunity to head coach there. So how are they able to build a resume? You know, you look at a Tubby Smith. How come Tubby Smith didn't get an opportunity to coach in the NBA? Nolan Richardson didn't get an opportunity to coach in the NBA, as far as I understand. Maybe he did. I might be remiss on that one. But he wasn't a long time if he did get in. The problem is that we don't have enough black coaches who have head coach experience. They got assistant coach experience, but not head coach experience to be pulled into the NBA coaching ranks. And when they get in there in the NBA coaching ranks, a lot of times it is assistant coach, so that these assistant coach can deal with these black players one-on-one. Because a lot of these head coaches, like a Tom Thibodeau, other coaches like this, don't have a way to relate to these new black players that are coming in and playing in the league today. That's what they're really used for. So I don't think we're going to really see it. I know I'm sounding like a broken record right now, but I just don't think we're going to see 80% of the coaches in the NBA are going to be black. I just don't see it.
Now, we talked about them being melanated. Any type of melanated player or coaches or GMs or presidents of operation. What about also the inclusion of females who have coached, who have played? I mean, we've got the San Antonio Spurs and I think the Chicago Bulls, maybe the only 2 teams in the, maybe, and I might be wrong, maybe the only 2 teams in the NBA that have female coaches, assistant coaches on their staff, where you have a Sue Bird sitting on the staff for the Spurs. Do we need more diversity in that realm also? Is this something that the Rooney Rule, and not specifically the Rooney Rule, but a Rooney Rule in theory, would that help in making the work situation in the NBA more diverse for melanated people and for women or other people of color who could come in and do these type of coaching jobs?
Well, the problem is with the NBA that there aren't any women playing. So you have a situation here where you're going to get some women. The women's game and the men's game are two different games. The women's game to me is a lot more technical because they're not going to be overly athletic all the time. They're great athletes, don't get me wrong, so I don't want to misstate that. But you don't see as many ladies flying to the rim and dunking the basketball. You don't see them playing above the rim or playing above their competitors like you see. You see a more back cutting type of program, ladies who can shoot from the perimeter. So you see a more of a motion offense type of play in the women's game. The men's game, if you are a physical freak athletically, you get an opportunity to play in the NBA. So it's two different games. Now, when you have the ladies coming in and coaching, they're very good theorists. You'd have, Becky Hammond was a trailblazer from, like you said, from the Spurs. You got Karen Stack, who's at the Chicago Bulls right now. And so you have a number of women. Lindsey Gottlieb was at the Cleveland Cavaliers. So you have a number of women who are getting the opportunity. But you got to remember, we're only about 30 or 40 years out where women weren't even allowed to be any part of the NBA organizations unless they were secretaries. You know what I'm saying? So they didn't get a chance at all to get into the coaching or anything like that. So we are far away from having a more diverse coaching staff because that's going to be about 50 or 60 years out from now if the NBA survives that long.
Wow, that is really, it's sobering to put it into perspective how long this can go. We are talking about leagues and teams where you have 90% of melanated players, but less than 10% of melanated coaches and less than 5% of melanated general managers and team presidents, which is really a shift. And I'm wondering if this shift, because of the era we're in or the time we're in, is it going to change? Does this moment, we'll call it the Black Lives Matter era, will this help to push the NBA and other leagues into a more progressive forward thinking, or is it just going to be status quo?
Well, I think what's happened with the Black Lives Matter movement right at this point, it got a lot of help from, I hate to say it, from the COVID-19 because of this pandemic, because there was a shutdown of money coming through. And so now you see these big organizations grasping for straws trying to stay alive. And we know we've seen a couple of big corporations starting to shut down because there's not enough money coming in. And because there's not enough money coming in, those corporations cannot buy advertising time for these different sports franchises. And so what you start to see is a domino effect, a fall starting to happen. And so now they're grasping at straws right now, trying to bring in revenue into these major sports programs. I mean, you saw the NFL commissioner basically put on a Black Lives t-shirt and told Colin Kaepernick, I am very sorry. And you looked at 18 months ago, that would have never happened. So it's the same situation going on. I think the Black Lives Matter movement in sports with the COVID-19 pandemic, this was all the perfect storm to see some change. But here's the issue about it. What real change have we seen? The only real change we've seen at this point in time is that guys are getting prosecuted or persecuted for kneeling during the national anthem. You see, in the WNBA, you saw a couple of teams actually walk off the floor while the national anthem was being played. But beyond that, what have we really seen any movement going forward because of the Black Lives Matter movement? It's a great movement, don't get me wrong. I'm a thorough believer in it. These young people out here are doing a wonderful thing with it. It needed to happen. But the issue is right now, what are we seeing change-wise in these leagues? And then once the COVID-19 pandemic is over with and they're able to get restarted again, what is the emphasis for them now, or the impetus for them to keep making diversity changes? So it's very interesting right now. I just think this soup that occurred was perfect for the Black Lives Matter movement.
So let's talk about it for a second. Let's talk about, we're moving on from the Black Lives Matter era, but we're moving into specific coaches. And we talk about it all the time because we look at a Chicago Bulls head coaching situation that really deteriorated as the season went on, even being a shortened season. But let's look at two coaches. Let's look at the parallels of two coaches. Let's look at Mark Jackson, someone who was the architect of maybe one of the greatest sports franchise runs that we've seen, dynasty runs that we've seen lately. And then you have the other side of that, which is TYRONN Lue, who was able to somehow keep that Cavaliers team together to beat that great dynasty. How do we look at the perspective of both of those head coaches, and what do we think about as they move forward? You're looking at two professional head coaches, two ex-players, two people who are respected in locker rooms and by former players and GMs, and they are unemployed. So let's start with Mark Jackson. That'll be our test case. When it comes to Mark Jackson, Jay Sizzle, let me ask you, why do you believe that Mark Jackson is unemployed?
Well, I think the reason why Mark Jackson is unemployed is the same reason what happened to him in Golden State. I think after a while, I think these guys get pigeonholed into being player-friendly coaches and not coaches who can be tough enough on these guys and take them to the next level. I think that's what we really saw with Golden State, that he was able to make that Golden State culture be what it was. I know Jaren Jack was talking about that, who played for him back in 2013, and was saying, hey, in the huddle, he's fantastic. He's absolutely great. He motivates guys. He makes them believe in themselves. But I think somehow or another, these organizations want a guy who's going to hold guys more accountable. And I think that's what the reason is, that Mark Jackson is not a guy who's looking like he's going to be a rebuilder or a guy who's going to come in on a championship team and push them forward. So he doesn't really have that actual what's the word I'm looking for? He's not a tough guy. You don't hear Mark Jackson come in and badmouth a player. You know, right. Tom Thibodeau is a guy, you know, if you can't play, you're going to sit the bench. That's right. What he's going to do. He'll play 7 guys the whole year, and the rest of y'all can eat hot dogs. That's what Tom Thibodeau is going to do. We saw him do that with the Chicago Bulls. But we know Tom Thibodeau is a really good coach, but he's not going to suffer the nonsense. Mark Jackson is more of a player's coach, but he's gotten that reputation that he's too much of a player's coach, which I believe. The players love him, and I don't think the ownership thinks he's a guy that can maneuver inside that program and really getting guys behind, especially the older guys, the veterans, and really make them play hard.
Okay, so let's look at the other side of that. Then where do we stand, or where's your stance specifically when it comes to TYRONN Lue?
Well, TYRONN Lue is a little bit different. I think TYRONN Lue didn't get what he should have got when he won the championship down with the Cavaliers, because he had 2 of the greatest basketball players at their positions to ever play in the NBA. You know, you had the LeBron James, you had a Kyrie Irving there. And so they pretty much think, well, you could have put anybody in that position and they would have won the championship. And then you look after Irving and LeBron left, you saw TYRONN Lue coach well, but he wasn't able to get them back to really stiffen the championships again. So I think it's the same type of situation. I think he's a player-friendly coach, and if he has really good players for him, it's just like right now with the Nets. It's like guys want him there. You know, Kyrie Irving wants him back at the Nets, and right now he's the odds-on favorite of getting that job over there with the Nets because Kyrie Irving wants him there. Kyrie Irving now is an OG in basketball. Kevin Durant wants him there. And so I think they're going to try to appease those guys because he's a player-friendly coach. Can he get those guys ready to play? So I think you see what a TYRONN Lue is, another guy who's not really a disciplinarian like a Tom Thibodeau. And I think these teams that they think they need discipline, like the Knicks, weren't going to hire a TYRONN Lue.
Let's look at that. Let's talk about, for a few seconds, you talked about the Nets. Kenny Atkinson was there. They had a good thing going. In fact, really before you got to a Kyrie, they seemed like they were one of those teams that were pushing forward on the come up. They were going to be a young team that was going to beat you a la the Bulls, young, playing hard, working hard. And so now you have more of a revolt that's happened because of a Kyrie Irving, where they've said, no, we don't want a good coach. We want our coach. So let's look at this. We had the opportunity, especially in Chicago, we had a chance to see it with Lovie Smith for the Chicago Bears. You have African American head coaches who have become labeled players coaches. They're the ones that the players love and they'll fall on the sword for, and they'll play all out for them, balls to the wall. They'll go out and they'll do exactly what that head coach wants. But my question to you, Jay, would be, have African American head coaches been given that label as a player's coach unfairly, or is it just because African American and melanated coaches know that they can't be as firm as they'd like to be to keep a job? Do they have to be more milquetoast in their coaching to be able to not only keep the respect of the players on the floor, but to keep a head coaching position with management and with ownership?
I mean, right now, I was just, because you were asking me the question, I was going through my mind talking about who is the hard-nosed black coach in the NBA?
Mm-hmm.
Who is it? I mean, I'm thinking Doc Rivers is about as hard-nosed as we
You've
get.
only got 4. So, I mean, if I'm thinking black head coaches, the hardest nosed head coach I can think of in professional sports right now would probably be with Pittsburgh, with the Steelers.
Right. Yeah, but he's been there, but they've only had 3 coaches that I want to say in 30 years, 35, 40 years. So they stay with their coaches. What I'm saying to you is that in the NBA and the NCAA run parallel with this. And the reason why I'm saying is run parallel with this because they both have to recruit players there. These are player-driven leagues right now. The NCAA football is player-driven. NCAA basketball is player-driven. NBA basketball is player-driven. So you have to have those coaching relationships to bring in these guys, these free agents to come in. Now the free agents, you have to have a guy who can have that relationship with these guys to bring them in. You're seeing, and that's why you start to see a lot of black assistant coaches on the bench for these NBA teams. But you also see the same exact thing in college. A boatload of black assistant coaches, but very few of them ever get the sniff of being the head coach. Why is that? Because they need those black assistant coaches to have relationships with those black players. And I think you're seeing a lot of the same thought process going on now. I mean, are they bringing in the TYRONN Lues because Kyrie Irving and them wants them to be there? Well, I think you're going to see something like that because Kyrie Irving and Durant are in a position to dictate who they want as head coach. That used to didn't be the situation. Now the problem is if TYRONN Lue comes in there and gets that head coaching position and say that they don't do well, how long is he going to be there? And that goes against his reputation. If he goes there with Irving, with a hurt Durant, and they still don't produce, is he ever going to get a shot at another head coaching job? So this is these are choppy waters right here out here for black coaches.
It is. And when you look at Penny Hardaway, or when you look at Patrick Ewing, you have coaches now who have NBA experience and they have not been successful collegiately. Yeah. If I'm quite sure Patrick Ewing is just barely at 500, and he took a story program and hasn't been able really to get good footing because he hasn't been able to get in the players. And you're right to that point. Do these head coaches, do these melanated head coaches ever get a shot again at being head coaches? It is so dicey when you look at, let's take, for example, Steve Kerr and Nick Nurse. Former player, not a player. Both have now championships. Both have led prolific teams and had wonderful seasons. But you don't see them having to then be labeled as players coach, because I don't know what you would call Steve Kerr. At times he seems to be a players coach, and then at times he seems to be a hard-nosed drill sergeant when it comes to his teams. Same thing you hear about Nick Nurse. So I don't think that non-melanated coaches have to deal with the same type of label, stigma. I don't know if they get that same push that melanated coaches get. And I'll let you have the last word. What do you think as we end this segment? What do you think is the future moving forward for melanated head coaches?
Well, what I think is really the future for head coaches, when you get a chance, you got to build that team, and you're going to have to win to keep getting a shot. Because right now, the only head coaches that are really going to get a shot are those who continue to win. I mean, you look at Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers is sitting over there with one of the best teams in the NBA because he's proven that he could win on the big time basis. And we understand pro sports is all about winning. We see how much teams are worth compared to how much they win. You saw a Golden State Warriors team. The Golden State Warriors were not that great, some 15 years ago. They just weren't. And all of a sudden you see a team that's come forth now, and they're one of the top franchises in the country. The biggest thing, though, is that you have players on that team like a Stephen Curry who demands respect on his own ball club. And so it makes it easier for the head coach when the number one player is bought in, a la Michael Jordan with Jackson. If Michael Jordan had not been bought in with Jackson, we would have never seen all 6 of those championships here with the Bulls. Might only been a couple, because had Jordan revolted at any point in time, especially in that second half, Jackson would have been gone.
Yeah, and for that truly, I think, is a way to capsule and put a period at the end of that. You have to win. And you have to win consistently, and you have to be good at what you do as far as putting this team together, as far as getting players to buy into your system and getting everybody on board at one time so that you keep your job and players get to keep the coaches they like in their position. So let me say this. If you are not subscribed to Iron Skillet Sports on any media platform, be it social media, be it YouTube, please find us at Iron Skillet Sports. You can always like, subscribe, and share. So anytime that you see Iron Skillet Sports, make sure that you're getting that notification to know when Iron Skillet Sports is on. And we'll talk to you on the other side.